Greetings, everyone. Chair of the summit process, Mr. Dale Epler, National Summit Coordinator of the United States. Participating delegations from member states to the Summit Implementation Review Group. Representatives of institutions of the Joint Summit Working Group. Representatives of civil society and social actors and of the private sector. My name is Valerie Isaac. I'm the coordinator of the Environmental Sustainability Unit at the Caribbean Development Bank, and I will be your moderator for this dialogue on climate change and sustainable development. Our panelists represent the private sector, social actors, and civil society organizations from across the Latin America and the Caribbean region. With us today are three panelists from the NGO think tank, three panelists from the private sector, and one panelist representing social actors. So from the NGO think tank, we have Mr. Romel Gonzalez, who is the coordinator of the Regional Indigenous and Popular Council of Pujil. Mr. Anthony Hamilton, President, Civil Society, Bahamas. Carlos Rivera Bianchini, President of the Board of Directors of the Foundation for Peace and Democracy. On our private sector panelists, we have Ms. Gail Burkhardt from the AES Corporation, Eleanor Jones, Chair of the Energy and Environment Committee, Private Sector Organization of Jamaica, and Paula Buendia, Executive Vice President of the National Business Association of Colombia. And our youth panelists, we have Nafesha Richardson from Spark, St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So this dialogue will be for a duration of 90 minutes. The first 45 minutes will be dedicated to the discussion between the panelists. And then following this discussion, the delegations and entities of the Joint Summit Working Group, the Summit Joint Working Group, will be invited to comment and ask any questions. And then this exchange will be permitted for 45 minutes. I will begin the panel discussion with a brief 3-minute presentation on the context of climate change and sustainable development from a regional perspective. Climate change remains one of the greatest challenges to the attainment of sustainable development goals in Latin America and the Caribbean due to the region's high exposure and vulnerability to climate-related hazards. Such hazards have negatively affected economic performance, productivity, livelihoods, and quality of life across the region. For instance, the 2017 hurricane season caused unprecedented destruction across the Caribbean with 2 Category 5 hurricanes, Irma and Maria. Last year, multiple storms impacted Central America. Hurricane Eta and Iota caused catastrophic damage and flooding in Nicaragua, Honduras, Guatemala, and Belize. Over the past few years, recurrent and prolonged droughts in many Central and South American countries have inflicted enormous damage and suffering on the region's people. Climate change projections suggest that these impacts will become more frequent and severe over the coming decades. The LAC region will experience rising sea levels, increased annual average temperatures, and increased intensity of extreme hydrometeorological events such as hurricanes, intense rainfall, and prolonged droughts. Poor rural and vulnerable coastal communities whose livelihoods largely depend on climate-sensitive sectors such as agriculture and fisheries will be disproportionately affected by climate-related disasters and alterations and depletion of vital natural resources and ecosystem functions. Climate change impacts can actually overturn years of hard-earned development gains and ultimately increase the level of poverty and inequality in many countries in LAC. The urgency, therefore, with which we must respond is often overlooked or misunderstood. The decisions we make over the next 10 years will shape our lives for decades to come. If we do not make the right policy and investment decisions now, we may find ourselves in a different pathway. If climate change is allowed to affect our region unabated in the coming years, the impacts on our people, livelihoods, and physical assets will mount. This will lead not only to considerable human suffering, but also significantly reduce fiscal space and cause a deterioration of private balance sheets across the region. But there are also some important opportunities. Many countries in the LAC region remain dependent on fossil fuel for their energy and transport sectors. This increases our vulnerability to fluctuations in global prices for these commodities, while also emitting pollutants that damage our health and well-being. But this need not be the case. as our region is blessed with abundant renewable energy resources. So meanwhile, by preserving and restoring the rich and diverse ecosystems that we find in our region, we can enhance our resilience while simultaneously reducing our carbon footprint. It is therefore imperative that we seize these opportunities to contribute to mitigating the changes in our climate that are threatening sustainable development in the LAC region, but also to increase our overall social development, economic competitiveness, and resilience in the long run. So with this context in mind, I would like to turn over to our panelists. Each panelist will have a 3-minute time period to make their statements on climate change and sustainable development from a regional perspective. So with that in mind, I will give the floor to the first panelist, Mr. Romel Gonzalez. You have the floor, Mr. Gonzalez.
Señor González, tiene que activar su cámara y su micrófono ahora.
Mr. González.
Sí, muy buenos días a todos y a todas. Para nosotros es importante este diálogo y también de que tengan una visión desde los pueblos indígenas. Para nosotros las causas, el cambio climático tiene su origen en las acciones humanas, denominadas antropogénicas, que científicamente se han demostrado que el aumento de los gases de efecto invernadero son por estas acciones provocando fenómenos socionaturales. Somos los humanos que estamos cambiando el clima. Es decir, el cambio climático no es un mito, es una situación real y sus consecuencias generan mayor daño en el aumento de la temperatura, modificaciones en los patrones de precipitación y en el alza del nivel del mar. Igualmente, su incremento de su capacidad destructiva o severa. Por nuestra posición geofísica o geográfica, es importante mencionar que América Latina genera menor contribución de emisiones de gas invernadero que las partes del norte. El modelo de desarrollo económico viene asociado a los procesos de mayor riesgo, a mayor explotación de los recursos naturales, mayor riesgo de fenómenos. Los megaproyectos como el Tren Maya, las minerías extractivas a cielo abierto, extracción de petróleo contribuyen al aceleramiento del cambio climático. Generan también deforestación, el crecimiento de las ciudades por falta de apoyo al campo y también la creación de mucha infraestructura de servicios de carretera en este caso. Nosotros consideramos y creemos, somos los pueblos indígenas donde se encuentran los recursos naturales más conservados, que producen oxígeno para todo el planeta. En América Latina, la Amazonía y luego la selva maya de México o Guatemala. Yo soy maya y en ese sentido yo vivo en la península de Yucatán, en la parte de la selva baja que tenemos. Y creamos corredores biológicos y una conectividad en ese sentido. Por eso nos interesa cuidar nuestra selva. Los efectos que genera en este caso el cambio climático son fenómenos naturales y antropogénicos que son cada vez mayores y más fuertes. Nosotros creemos en este caso que han generado, como ejemplo, si vivimos en una selva, ha generado también problemas de sequías y muy fuertes y muy prolongadas y cambios antemporales. Nuestras alternativas. Nosotros creemos que una de las cuestiones importantes es cambiar el modelo de producción agrícola que debería ser por agroecología. Debemos de generar ecotecnias que nos permitan, en este caso, una mejor adaptación a los recursos de manera sustentable, producir energía social de manera distributiva y no parques y grandes solares. Una propuesta de capacitación en temas de recuperación, restauración, ecología y agroecología y de financiamiento para llevar adelante la recuperación y la restauración ecológica de nuestros proyectos. Les agradezco y queremos, insistimos, nosotros producimos y cuidamos nuestros bosques, cuidamos nuestra selva y por eso hay una responsabilidad social. Gracias.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gonzalez. I see Ms. Madelka is requesting the floor. Ms. McCullough, sorry. Oh, okay. I thought Ms. McCullough was requesting the floor. So can I ask Mr. Hamilton to speak? The next panelist on the NGO think tank.
People are the most important asset and investment of all nations. Therefore, all decisions made on behalf of the citizenry should reflect this. An excellent method to express this position is through the strategic development of a national development plan that includes the utilization of collective contributions, further fostering a joint relationship of our regional national development plans for implementation, and periodic intentional evaluations can enhance positive outcomes for the people of all member nations of the Organization of American States. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I thank the organizers and the support team for this privilege to participate today. The cry, the call, and the response are to be undergirded by proactive decision-making for protection, provisions, and preparation of the citizenry for a future of good governance success. Our people are crying out for protection. The call is for provisions, and our response should be to make preparation to meet the necessary needs. Climate change in the context of sustainable development is an issue that demands initiatives of re-education, training, wellness, poverty eradication through balanced socio-economic empowerment and environmental awareness. Joint engagements among sectors such as the tourism and transport industry, agriculture and fisheries, public health, environmental health, and agencies that manage natural resources should be solidified to ensure that best practices are consistently in place and being followed. In conclusion, the diagram being displayed speaks to the balanced tripart relationship that is absolutely critical for success as we seek to achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals with regard to climate change. An amiable relationship among government, the private sector, and civil society bodes well for progress in every nation. We must continue to bridge the gaps that exist in order to ensure economic development, social development, and environmental protection for future generations. Climate change is an individual, national, regional, and global challenge, and each of us as citizens in our respective communities must take responsibility. In particular, the Commonwealth of the Bahamas as an archipelago, the Turks and Caicos Islands territory, our immediate neighbors, the Caribbean region at large, and the world. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hamilton, for that. May I please invite Mr. Carlos Rivera Bianchini to take the floor.
Señor Bianchini, si puede solicitar la palabra, por favor. Botón azul abajo a la derecha. I see Bianchini is connected, but he's not requesting the floor.
Oh. Okay. Maybe
Señor Bianchini. Here he's requesting now.
Please proceed, Mr. Bianchini.
Listo.
Ahí lo
Muy
escuchamos.
buenos días. La situación actual que vivimos a nivel mundial, producto de los impactos generados de la pandemia por COVID-19, nos hace voltear una vez más la mirada hacia una necesidad global de cambiar y estrechar las estrategias de desarrollo económico con las políticas de protección y conservación de recursos naturales, con el fin de encontrar soluciones basadas en la naturaleza para fortalecer la resiliencia ante crisis económicas y reducir los impactos socioambientales en poblaciones vulnerables y no vulnerables. Por años se han generado e implementado estrategias de desarrollo económico y social completamente alejadas del componente de gestión ambiental, lo cual ha llevado a problemas graves de explotación de los recursos como parte del uso excesivo de los servicios ecosistémicos por gran cantidad de industrias y sus procesos productivos. Esta forma no controlada de operación, que incluye la producción y distribución de bienes y servicios en los diferentes países, ha provocado también consecuencias drásticas en procesos de fenómenos naturales, entre ellos el efecto invernadero. Es la intensificación de este efecto invernadero por causas antropogénicas que ha producido el aumento de la temperatura global o lo que conocemos como cambio climático. Las múltiples alteraciones en los fenómenos meteorológicos que el cambio climático ha provocado y los impactos de estos en la población humana, la economía local y regional y la biodiversidad de especies a nivel global obligan a los gobiernos y sector privado a unificar esfuerzos e implementar estrategias y planes de acción que permitan la mitigación del cambio climático en sus territorios. Este tipo de acciones también derivan del compromiso a nivel mundial al que se han unido los gobiernos mediante un acuerdo en común para luchar por un mismo objetivo, la mitigación y la adaptación al cambio climático, en este caso, por ejemplo, a través de los acuerdos de París adoptados en la Conferencia sobre el Clima de París en diciembre del 2015. Se hace urgente normalizar el vínculo entre el sector político, productivo y ambiental para la creación de directrices e iniciativas nacionales y regionales dirigidas hacia el fortalecimiento de la economía, la educación, la salud pública, de la mano de la conservación de ecosistemas acuáticos y terrestres y el control de las variables antropogénicas que pueden alterarlos. Esta integración de sectores permitiría reforzar la labor de los países en sus procesos de implementación de los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible como parte de la Agenda 2030 adoptada por la Asamblea General de la ONU, que busca, comillas, implementar planes de acción para combatir la pobreza y desigualdad, construcción de sociedades pacíficas, justas e inclusivas, proteger los derechos humanos y promover la igualdad entre los géneros y el empoderamiento de las mujeres y las niñas y garantizar una protección duradera del planeta y sus recursos naturales. La relación entre el Acuerdo de París y las ODS es evidentemente necesario recordar para ello los objetivos del presente mes de junio: acción por el clima, vida submarina, vida de ecosistemas terrestres. De esta manera se nos recuerda que el desarrollo de los pueblos y naciones enteras debe dirigirse únicamente hacia un enfoque sostenible que procure el bienestar de los habitantes actuales sin comprometer la disponibilidad de los recursos para las futuras generaciones. Es de suma importancia que desde cada gobierno y los enlaces que se establezcan con el sector privado y organismos de cooperación nacional e internacional se identifiquen los puntos clave en las cadenas de producción, procesos productivos, prestación de bienes y servicios y en el modelo económico en general de cada país para trabajar sobre estos en mira de lograr un cambio transformacional que permita la optimización de procesos industriales basados en la reducción de emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero y la utilización de fuentes de energía renovables, aumentando la productividad y disminuyendo cada una vez más la dependencia de los combustibles fósiles. Estos procesos de cambio en los modelos de operación hacia metodologías sostenibles deben tomar en cuenta sectores importantes para la reactivación económica, como es el sector agrícola, que permite la generación de gran cantidad de empleos y a su vez asegura la disponibilidad de alimentos para la población. Sin embargo, es uno de los más vulnerables a los impactos del cambio climático. Por esta razón, en este y otros sectores es necesario que se dirijan los esfuerzos al apoyo de pequeñas y medianas empresas con modelos y proyectos de negocios basados en técnicas sostenibles y conservacionistas, incluyendo aspectos como prácticas sostenibles de uso del suelo, modelos agroecológicos, alternativas al excesivo uso de plaguicidas y adaptación a condiciones de sequía y otras afectaciones del cambio climático. Con esta visión general de los esfuerzos multisectoriales que se deben realizar en la lucha por mitigar el cambio climático y transformar las economías en bioeconomías dirigidas al desarrollo sostenible, se reconoce entonces la importancia de establecer esa conectividad y trabajo en conjunto entre países de una misma región y hasta diferentes continentes. Este trabajo en conjunto, aparte de fortalecer las cadenas de suministros, también impulsa la conservación de áreas protegidas vulnerables que en ocasiones se ubican en territorios de diferentes países y que son hábitats de especies amenazadas, migratorias o residentes y sitios de defensa ante el impacto del cambio climático, como son los parques nacionales, corredores biológicos y sitios Ramsar. Esta inclusión del componente de conservación de los recursos naturales en los objetivos del desarrollo sostenible de cada región permite luchar contra las amenazas a las que están expuestas las diferentes especies y ecosistemas, como la deforestación y la desertificación de bosques y la acidificación, contaminación y explotación de océanos. Finalmente, la integración de actores responsables en la puesta de planes de marcha estratégicas y políticas relacionadas al desarrollo sostenible y de manera implícita a la adaptación y reversión del cambio climático es una necesidad urgente para abordar tanto la pandemia como la emergencia climática, con el fin de salvar vidas y medios de subsistencia. Con estas acciones se pueden asegurar en gran medida el establecimiento de ambientes sanos y saludables, la disponibilidad de alimentos, el acceso al agua potable, la infraestructura, se evita la aparición de enfermedades zoonóticas, se incrementa el mejoramiento de la economía en sectores costeros y se disminuye la vulnerabilidad y el riesgo ante desastres naturales, provocando un declive en el impacto de los mismos a nivel social, económico y, por supuesto, ambiental. La situación actual nos brinda una brillante oportunidad para ejecutar cambios y transformaciones sistémicas que nos lleven hacia una economía sostenible, bidireccional, funcional tanto para las personas como para el planeta que hoy en día lo demanda. Muchas gracias.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bianchini. I'd like to move swiftly on to our private sector panelists, and I would ask Ms. Burkhardt to please take the floor.
Ms. Makaya, could you please open your camera and your microphone?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, so I'm Madelka Makala. I represent AES. Thank you very much, Valerie. On behalf of AES, I would like to commend the efforts of the Summit Secretariat and thank the Secretariat for the invitation to be an active participant of this consultation process leading to the NIN Summit of the Americas. AES is a Fortune 500 global company accelerating the future of energy with a very strong presence in the Americas. We believe that the energy transformation to renewable sources must be the basis for the America's sustainable development. And we are taking decisive, measurable actions to both transform our own portfolio and create innovative solutions that enable governments to achieve their sustainability objectives, as well as other companies and industries to rapidly decarbonize whole economies. We know that Latin America and the Caribbean is highly vulnerable to the consequences of climate change and has suffered from great social and economic disruption from the COVID-19 pandemic. But we believe that the region has a unique potential and a great variety of renewable energy resources, in many cases largely untapped, that governments could take advantage from to not only accelerate a responsible transition to cleaner sources, but also to initiate new renewable projects that could revive industries and create new jobs in the region, offsetting, at least partially, the social and economic impacts of the coronavirus pandemic. We have experienced the impact of the pandemic in these countries firsthand, and we continue to support local and regional economies with the training of local workforce on new technologies for the digital world, capacity building and job generation, as well as social impact programs well in line with the UN Sustainable Development Goals and community needs. Our experience has taught us that the importance of making this energy transition in an orderly and responsible manner, and it is very important to work with all stakeholders, government, communities, private sectors, and customers to do so. Our experience has also taught us that it is very important to have the necessary investment, not only in the renewable energy, but also in other key links in the electricity supply chain. In our perspective, there are a few things that are critical to accelerate responsible energy transition in the Americas while ensuring grid stability, flexibility, reliability, and affordability, of course, for customers. Well, the first one, and it has been a recurring theme today, is the respect for the rule of law to funnel investments towards cleaner energy solutions and protect private sector investments in Latin America and the Caribbean, as well as a level playing field. It is also very important to continue to promote regional energy integration and investments in power distribution, renewables, and natural gas to ensure security, affordability, and again, resiliency in the region. For example, DCPAC, we see an enormous opportunity to modernize the Northern Triangle's power grid and double the capacity of the Central American electrical interconnection system to generate electricity for the region. But this will require the standardization of regulations and internal adjustments in the transmission system of each country to maximize the use of the line from 300 megawatts to 600 megawatts. And it would also require the implementation of new technologies, regulations currently not recognized in Central America, such as energy storage and the interconnection between Central America and Colombia. As I said before, the technological development of innovative systems that would allow us to be successful in these transitions and to make renewable energy widely affordable and available will require integrated policy approaches with special focus on energy storage, but also new innovations like hydrogen and carbon capture. We also believe it is very important to work together, and I can stress that often enough, to work together in exploring cross-border opportunities and international mechanisms to accelerate the transition to net zero. And last but not least, I want to take advantage of this opportunity to share that we are also proud to serve as chair of the Energy Working Group of the IDB's American Business Dialogue. As a group, we have worked on very concrete recommendations that we would happily share. But in general terms, we agreed that the investment in the energy sector should focus on strengthening the resilience and sustainability of energy systems while making energy more affordable for people in the region. Thanks again for this opportunity. As one of the world's leading renewable energy developers, we believe that our global experience and expertise of more than 40 years could certainly add value to these discussions, and we look forward to continuing our collaboration with the Summit Implementation Review Group to define a promising agenda for the upcoming Summit of the Americas. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Burkhardt. Ms. Buendia, could you please take the floor?
Muy buenos días, muchas gracias por la invitación. Para nosotros es muy importante participar de estas mesas preparatorias para la cumbre y pues como mencionaron anteriormente también venimos participando muy activamente en todo el diálogo del American Business Dialogue. Para la Asociación Nacional de Empresarios de Colombia, ANDI, es muy importante participar en estas iniciativas que nos permiten compartir buenas prácticas e identificar nuevas oportunidades de trabajo de forma conjunta. Para nosotros, el desarrollo sostenible es un pilar fundamental para el buen desempeño del sector privado en Colombia, ya que las empresas empiezan a aportar de manera consciente a problemáticas como el cambio climático, la desigualdad, la pobreza, entre otros. Dado ese profundo compromiso con estos temas, reconocemos la urgencia de fomentar la sostenibilidad ambiental en las empresas, por lo que desarrollamos el proyecto conocido Visión 3030 sobre economía circular y donde también participamos activamente en todas las mesas relacionadas con este tema en la Alianza del Pacífico. Vale la pena resaltar que durante la pandemia los esfuerzos por la sostenibilidad no se detuvieron, puesto que la economía circular, la protección del medio ambiente y la generación de oportunidades cobran una importancia preponderante para superar los retos que resultaron de la pandemia. Algunos ejemplos que quisiéramos mencionar en estos temas son, el primero, el proyecto Visión 3030 que les acabo de mencionar. Este proyecto es una iniciativa colectiva que promueve la transición hacia una economía circular de los materiales de envases y empaques puestos en el mercado. En este momento, este proyecto cuenta con más de 280 empresas de 27 sectores económicos. El año pasado, en esa fase piloto, el proyecto logró la recolección y el reciclaje de más de 30.000 toneladas de papel, cartón, plásticos, vidrio y metales, apoyando la labor de 2.500 recicladores de oficio en 22 departamentos y 55 municipios del país, así como un trabajo conjunto con una red de más de 80 empresas fabricantes de envases y empaques y de recolección y aprovechamiento de residuos. En el tema de cambio climático, sumado al anterior, es importante mencionar que la economía circular puede contribuir a las metas de reducción de emisiones de CO2 hasta en un 45% al 2050, según el último reporte del Ellen MacArthur Foundation. Por lo que consideramos que es muy importante seguir trabajando en esta línea de trabajo en el sector privado. Por empleo verde y pasando a otro tema, para nosotros es importante apoyar las iniciativas en economía circular y biodiversidad, puesto que además en la actualidad se considera que pueden crearse en América Latina y el Caribe hasta 15 millones de empleos al 2030 en sectores como son las energías renovables, el uso sostenible de la biodiversidad y la economía circular, entre otros sectores relacionados. De acuerdo con la OIT, la economía circular contribuye a más de la tercera parte y es central en estas fases de reactivación. En la Alianza del Pacífico, como les mencioné anteriormente, venimos trabajando en una mesa de economía circular y plásticos, que tiene 4 líneas de acción que me gustaría mencionar. La primera, innovación e intercambio de buenas prácticas en economía circular, acciones para reducir el uso y aumentar las tasas de aprovechamiento de materiales. Tercero, generar oportunidades de inversión y financiamiento. Y por último, promover el cambio de comportamiento de los ciudadanos y el empleo verde. Para mencionar un último tema que es reciente, la coalición de la economía circular para América Latina y el Caribe. Vale la pena mencionar esto, que en febrero fue creada la plataforma regional para mejorar la cooperación interministerial, multisectorial y multiactor para aumentar el conocimiento y la comprensión sobre economía circular, facilitar la formación, la capacitación y la asistencia técnica para el desarrollo de políticas públicas de economía circular. Esta iniciativa, liderada por un grupo de organizaciones muy importantes como el BID, el WEF, para mencionar algunos de ellos, ha buscado que también participen gobiernos, sector privado y otro tipo de organizaciones. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Ms. Buendia, for this intervention. I would now like to ask Ms. Eleanor Jones to take the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. Valerie, it's good to see you. Thanks to everyone, distinguished leaders, distinguished participants. I greet you on behalf of the private sector organization of Jamaica. I am representing the organization as chair of the Energy, Environment, and Climate Change Subcommittee. And we have been doing a lot of work trying to crowd in, as the saying goes, the private sector, working with the government of Jamaica on a number of issues. I'm thankful for the opportunity to share some perspectives on climate change and sustainability as it relates to leveraging the power of the private sector as a significant partner, using some of the terms that I saw in the working papers, significant partner with governments and civil society to help chart the course toward the sustainable journey, collaboration. And we also speak in these working papers of unleashing the power of investing for sustainability, partnering for transformation, or dealing with a roadmap, et cetera, et cetera. And from those perspectives, I want to share two approaches from the Caribbean that may be instructive and useful for us. And the first relates to a partnership that took place with the Climate Change Division of the Ministry of Urban Renewal, Housing, Energy, and Climate Change of the government of Jamaica. The climate change through the government applied to the Green Climate Fund for readiness funds, to really lead a perspective in the Caribbean. So they undertook a scoping exercise to try to support mobilization of private sector investment in building a low carbon economy and climate resilience. And the background to it was that if we're going to try to bring the private sector in, we have to have an understanding of where the private sector is at the moment, what may be preventing them from investing the way that we would like them to be, what are some of the barriers, and how we get there. So it was a highly consultative process and involved a number of territories in the CARICOM region. And coming out of the scoping exercise, we had a regional workshop. We had a national workshop in Jamaica, first of all, and then a regional workshop, both of which the private sector organization partnered with the Climate Change Division to put on. So we brought together representatives from the CARICOM region to share the findings of the scoping report, and also to share a draft of an action plan which would go forward for further funding. And it was a most interesting and illuminating exercise, because while we keep talking about let's crowd in the private sector, let's try to mobilize investment, we have to understand, first of all, as we speak of the private sector, we're talking about a complex sector, in that roughly 90% of private sector entities in the Caribbean region fit into the micro, small, and medium enterprise category. So there is a tendency to think of private sector as large entities, which is not really so. We have large entities, but if we're going to hone in all of the private sector, we have to think also in terms of the small and medium enterprise. And the scoping exercise really focused on that component, and we also consulted with large supporting organizations. So what did the scoping report highlight? It highlighted that there's a real need for several categories of government interventions to catalyze or leverage the private sector for building, mitigation, and adaptation. What are some of the business relevant interventions that were needed? Climate information. We found several companies knew about climate change. They had an idea that maybe it's affecting their business, and this was across the region, but they didn't quite know what to do. Risk analysis, technical assistance, training, policy development that could enable investments in both adaptation and mitigation, market and business development, encouragement of partnerships and cooperatives, and deployment of financial instruments. And so the framework, given the time that we have, the framework basically spoke to enabling the national, developing a national enabling environment in each of the territories, supporting the management of operational risk, supporting the development of new business opportunities, and attracting and directing private sector investment. And it's interesting. It's a wide range of in each of these 4 categories. Building and attracting investment just doesn't happen. You have to really build the capacity to make it happen. The second issue that I want, looking at the time, the second point that I want to raise, really just to apprise, as we talk about investment, coming out of that scoping exercise also, and coming out of all of the discussions on the private sector window, that is one of the areas of focus of the Green Climate Fund, is a green bond. And the Jamaica Stock Exchange has bought into a green bond, and the Climate Change Fund has provided some of the support to get the green bond activating. And the green bond will actually be launched next week. And I should mention that the Jamaica Stock Exchange is a member of the Sustainable Stock Exchange initiatives. So, and the green bond then is intended, of course, to support, attract investments for building climate resilience and for environmental sustainability in business. So those 2 aspects of private sector climate change and sustainability I wanted to share given the time. I should mention that the Private Sector Organization of Jamaica is an umbrella organization for the private sector in general. We have small, medium, and enterprises as MSME Alliance as a member, as well as the very large corporate entities, and we have other associations that are members. So it's a broad spectrum, and we're very pleased, those of us in the private sector involved, that we were able to partner with the Climate Change Division, and there is a continuing link and interest with the government and the private sector to try to move this along. So thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jones. And lastly, we will ask our sole youth on the panel, Ms. Richardson, to please take the mic. You have the floor, Ms. Richardson.
Mrs. Ask, let me just ask for the Mr. Hamilton and Mr. Rivera to request the floor also to stay in the screen. Please, all the panelists, can you request the floor that they are not in the screen? Just to have everyone in the screen. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you. And first of all, let me say that I'm so honored to have the opportunity to be a part of this very important and timely dialogue on climate change and sustainable development. Recently, my country, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, we experienced a volcanic eruption which displaced thousands of people and has had disastrous effects on our economic sector, our agriculture, livestock, and our people. Thousands have been placed and are still living in shelters. And with June marking the beginning of the hurricane season, we are more vulnerable than ever to being severely affected. So for this reason, and also considering the impact of COVID-19, sustainable development must be at the core of all of our policies and our initiatives. However, I'm a strong and firm believer that we must take an intergenerational approach to defy some of our existing and sort of archaic mechanisms which are holding sustainable development back. Unfortunately, as we see in Latin America and the Caribbean, a lot of our systems are snail-paced and quite bureaucratic. In the Caribbean, as small island developing states, we need faster and more technology-based solutions more than ever. And I believe that working with young people is the solution to this. However, we need to ensure that when we work with young people, it's meaningful youth engagement. and that we create more spaces like this one for intergenerational dialogue. This involves collaborative action, learning, and substantive decision-making in the global environmental governance. Quite often when we see that young people are engaged, it's just to display their accomplishments, and it can sort of amount to youth washing. When this happens, on the one hand, it's easy to say, look, we are engaging young people, we have a young person on this board, or we have a young person on this panel. But apart from that, even though you're being put in this space, you're not being meaningfully engaged. And sometimes, as a young person, it becomes quite difficult to speak up and feel as though you're being heard on the issues that you're so passionate about. So I must say that it is truly a breath of fresh air to be a part of this type of dialogue, which promotes partnership and advances climate action. And it ensures that young people who are and will very soon be our leaders, they already have the knowledge and practical know-how to maneuver these political landscapes, which can be quite tricky and which serve as the backdrop for achieving this transformative climate action that we are all desirous of. So I am really looking forward to this discussion, and thank you again for inviting me.
Thank you very much, Ms. Richardson. We have some time, I think, to ask a couple, maybe 2 questions. And what I will do is ask the panelists, I guess, a general question for all the panelists to respond. We've heard quite a few issues arose during the very, very useful and informative presentations that were made by all of the panelists. One of a common theme being partnerships, recognizing that we all have limited resources, and also the whole of government, whole of society approaches as being some of those issues. So I would like to throw out a question to all the panelists. Good governance was something that is always mentioned as a critical aspect to us being able to meet some of the climate change, the challenges that climate change would bring to the Latin American Caribbean region. I want to ask any of the panelists, what actions do you think can civil society, private sector, social actors in the region, what actions can we take now to contribute to scaling up the climate action that we've all mentioned? For example, Ms. Buendia, you spoke about the circular economy and the importance of the circular economy. Ms. Boka, you talked about some of the challenges of the energy. We've heard I'm sorry, your name just slipped me. We heard about the need to ensure that biodiversity is integrated into the process, right, and not just focus on the gray aspects or the gray solutions. So I wanted to ask this question: what are some of in the context of governance, good governance, what are some of those urgent actions that we require?
May I go first?
Please.
Yeah, okay. I support the points in circular economy, the energy transition, biodiversity, all of which are very important. One of the challenges that we have nationally and in the region is that we operate in silos. We tend to have little package of events or activities taking place. If somehow we can manage to break down those silos, and it's not going to happen with a magic wand. And speaking from the private sector perspective, we have to, if we're going to be supporting the circular economy, we're supporting biodiversity. We have to look at technological innovations. What innovations can we do in a gradual way to address some of these? And then very importantly, we need the investments. And how can we bring private sector, the financial investments that are necessary to make some of these things happen. So I think we need to perhaps be talking more, but acting more, because we all tend to do a lot of talking. And I was interested in Ms. Richards from St. Vincent. I like the term, the youth washing. Maybe we could say climate washing. But we're doing a lot. We have made significant progress. But I think just trying to break down the silos through investment and through technological innovation.
So here's Madalka Mikhail again from the AS Corporation. If I could complement what Eleanor has said, I agree with all the points that were raised. I think that, being part of the energy sector, we're also seeing some restrictive regulatory frameworks that we need to break through, right? If you take energy storage, for example, right? Energy storage has the potential to revolutionize the electrical sector by providing the needed grid stability and accommodate the penetration of renewables that we're looking for, right? And I mentioned that briefly. But countries and consequently regulations have been slow. I think someone mentioned that before, to evolve and capture the values and benefits of this technology that can bring to the grid. So today, batteries is just an example. We have other new innovations that should be supporting that transition, that responsible transition to a more sustainable technology, but we're still seeing that regulation is not following, right? So we as a private company, we're willing to invest. We have a lot of experience. And as I said, yes, as Eleanor mentioned as well, we need to be having this type of conversations, but also we need to work together with governments and the civil society to make sure that the regulatory framework is there for us to be able to invest and obviously support the region in its decarbonization process.
Thank you.
Sí.
Go ahead, Mr. González.
Sí, miren, con respecto a la pregunta, una buena gobernanza para los pueblos indígenas es dos cuestiones fundamentales. Uno, el reconocimiento de la libre determinación y el derecho de la consulta. ¿Por qué? Porque si las inversiones que se hagan por parte del gobierno y por las empresas son consultadas de una manera muy clara, muy precisa, de manera detallada, como lo dice el convenio 169 de la OIT, va a permitir realmente una inversión diferente. Mientras no se haga, esto va a generar una imposición y eso genera conflicto. En ese sentido, por eso decimos que nosotros, en los pueblos indígenas, y a mí me ha tocado recorrer muchos países de América Latina y conociendo nuestros pueblos, tenemos las reservas naturales más fuertes, más grandes, y somos nosotros los que cuidamos bastante la selva. Y en ese sentido hemos estado viendo cómo si se impone un gran parque solar, lo que genera es un problema de desforestación. Pero si en cambio se utiliza una producción de energía distributiva, eso genera menos desforestación, genera mayor energía a la gente y es mejor. En ese sentido, creemos que las economías, si son circulares, como ejemplo nosotros decimos que hay que partir, como ejemplo ahorita, nosotros hacemos mucha agroecología, preparamos la tierra para no crear fuentes de una barrera, en este caso hacer una barrera ecológica que permita mejorar los suelos para que no se destruya la selva. Hacemos uso de controles biológicos, hacemos en este caso cuestiones de biofertilizantes y tratamos de dar capacitación. Si hubiera una relación hermana con la naturaleza, creo que el desarrollo económico sería diferente y habría menos problemas de eso. De hecho, si ven, nosotros en nuestra experiencia hemos construido ahorita huertos familiares. Estamos creando muchos huertos familiares ante el problema del COVID. Y si se dan cuenta, parte de las enfermedades del COVID es porque son enfermedades zoonóticas que se han generado por el crecimiento, la deforestación, y esto genera un conflicto hacia las comunidades mismas. Entonces, termino diciendo que aquí la buena gobernanza empieza reconociendo nuestros derechos como pueblos indígenas y que se nos consulte bajo el término de la libre determinación y la consulta y el consentimiento. Gracias.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. We have a very tight time constraint, and we still need to open the floor to the delegations and the members of the Joint Summit Working Group. So I'm just looking to see, I see no additional requests for the floor. So with your permission, oh, okay, sorry, Mr. Okay, I'm just seeing it coming through. Go ahead, Mr. Hamilton.
Okay, Dr. Hamilton from
Dr. Hamilton.
Yes, that's fine. Further, expanding what was shared already, the tripartite governance relationship, environment and atmosphere has to be strengthened remotely in conjunction with the joint national development plans to influence both national and regional policy decisions. And I'm speaking to this in light of the recent hurricane experiences. Mr. Bahamas encountered Dorian in a major way. And on the heels of that, we have the COVID-19 environment. So the demand for inclusion and consultation is critical for the stakeholdership to be engaged. The relationship can be captured in the essence of the Sustainable Development Goals 16 and 17. And I want to take 2 points in connection with this. The first being to engage business models that has commercial advantages that extends well beyond just the delivery of, for example, fuel at a competitive price. And secondly, engage private enterprise and government partnerships for related activities that augment the use of strategic energy types while reducing both costs and carbon emissions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hamilton. So with your, there's, okay. Sorry, I noticed someone was asking to, Mr. Bianchi, were you requesting the floor? Bianchini?
Gracias, sí. Un minuto nomás. Importante, como se ha dicho aquí, que hay diferentes aristas que tenemos que tomar en cuenta. Uno, la decisión para efectos de gobernanza, la decisión de los gobiernos es fundamental, es importante. Es decir, si queremos cambiar, si queremos implementar, como se ha dicho aquí, directrices claras, precisas, que permitan la protección, cambios en la manera de actuar y de pensar, es fundamental la decisión del gobierno. Segundo, tercero, lo decía el señor Hamilton, la participación plena de la sociedad civil, que esté debidamente informada de lo que está sucediendo, de lo que está pasando. Si aquí no logramos armar una estructura permanente entre gobierno, sociedad civil, difícilmente vamos a hacer cambios importantes. Y como bien decían otros dos participantes, las nuevas generaciones están deseosas de hacer cambios en esta materia. Y nosotros debemos de promover, como organizaciones de la sociedad civil, promover ese cambio. Y la otra arista que es importante es la comunidad internacional, los organismos internacionales, la dirección a aquellos esfuerzos, la dirección de aquellos recursos a esfuerzos que organizaciones de la sociedad civil puedan realizar. Eso es fundamental, ¿verdad? Es fundamental que nosotros podamos tener la oportunidad amplia de requerir, de llegar a organismos de carácter internacional que permitan esa protección, como decía el señor González, que cuando es necesario ir a una zona indígena, primero consultemos, primero preguntemos y luego tomamos las decisiones. Gracias, muy amables.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bianchini. So unfortunately, we have to move on. We're really behind for another session, our second part of the discussion. So now I will have to open up the floor to the delegations and to any members of the Joint Summit Working Group. Thank you. Okay. I see Miss Anna Isabel, sorry, I'm not seeing it, requesting the floor. Miss Anna Isabel Carrillo. Please go ahead.
Muy buenas tardes, muy buenos días a todos. Muchísimas gracias. Agradecemos enormemente este diálogo. Nos parece muy importante. Mando un saludo desde Guatemala. Para la región centroamericana también es un tema altamente importante, ya que como muchas islas del Caribe nos consideramos una región altamente vulnerable a los efectos del cambio climático. Así que de verdad que agradecemos muchísimo este intercambio y la información pues brindada por los distintos panelistas. Frente a estos desafíos, nada más quería comentar, pues es importante ser reconocidos la región centroamericana, la región del Caribe, como países altamente vulnerables a los efectos del cambio climático, con el objetivo también de obtener el apoyo financiero necesario para enfrentar todos aquellos efectos negativos del cambio climático y continuar en el cambio hacia una economía más verde basada en una estrategia de desarrollo bajo emisiones. Nosotros en Guatemala hemos estado sumando la lucha por reducir los efectos de cambio climático a través de esfuerzos regionales en plataformas multilaterales como es en la OEA. Como ustedes saben, este año nosotros seremos el país sede de la Asamblea General de la OEA y nosotros pues tomaremos en cuenta este tema de los efectos del cambio climático y la vulnerabilidad de la región como uno de los temas importantes y principales de nuestra Asamblea General. También estamos trabajando en la creación de un centro regional de combate contra incendios forestales. También, como tenemos muchas lluvias, tenemos muchas tormentas, también tenemos épocas muy secas. Y eso provoca pues incendios forestales de grandes magnitudes que muchas veces es complejo pues poderlas enfrentar. Entonces también estamos en la elaboración de este centro y hemos estado solicitando todo aquel apoyo de buenas prácticas, de cooperación técnica para los distintos países que nos puedan pues ayudar y brindar ese apoyo para poder hacerlo y hacer frente a estos embates que tenemos este efecto de los cambios climáticos. Y nuevamente, pues ya para terminar, agradezco a la presidencia el espacio para compartir nuestras preocupaciones y avances en áreas de fortalecer ese proceso tan importante de diálogo como lo es la Cumbre de las Américas. Así que muchísimas gracias y por aquí me quedo. Feliz día, gracias.
Thank you very much, representative from Guatemala. I would like to move swiftly on to Ms. Edwards, representative from Guyana. Please take the floor. Ms. Edwards?
Ms. Edwards, could you please request the floor again?
Please proceed, Ms. Edwards.
I think she's having technical difficulties.
Okay. Well, in the meantime...
She's there now. I'm sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good afternoon, colleagues, and I'm sorry for the short delay. First of all, I wanted to thank the representatives of civil society and the private sector for the very useful perspectives that they've offered on the topic under consideration. And Guyana wanted to add a few points as well to the discussion. First, we welcome this focus on climate change and sustainable development, particularly given the challenges that the most vulnerable countries are confronting at the current juncture as we strive to fully and effectively implement the 2030 agenda. We believe that focusing on these issues is warranted owing to the multidimensional consequences occasioned by the COVID-19 pandemic, which has both exacerbated pre-existing challenges and brought on new ones. In this context, Guyana views as urgent ongoing focus on financing both for development more broadly and for resilience building in response to climate change. I would therefore like to offer some brief comments on these two tracks. Firstly, on the issue of development financing, I wanted to underscore my country's commitment to the full implementation of the Addis Ababa Action Agenda adopted at the Third International Conference on Financing for Development, and its recommendation for a new global framework for financing sustainable development by aligning all financing flows and policies with economic, social, and environmental priorities. We believe that scaling up action for the full implementation of the Addis Ababa Action Agenda and addressing the challenge of financing, particularly in the COVID era, are especially urgent. Cognizant that vulnerable countries, especially small island developing states, are grappling with pre-existing challenges in the global financial system, Guyana views as critical international solidarity and action to address the debilitating socioeconomic impacts of the pandemic, including GDP contraction, widening fiscal constraints, and mounting debt, as well as those challenges which have been further amplified by the pandemic. As developing countries contend with a reduction in vital liquidity and fiscal space, increasing debt, and reduced external financial flows, we think it is important to focus on structural transformation of the global financial system. The aim of this exercise should be to strengthen countries' capacity to respond to future shocks, including by addressing sustainable debt management. Innovative financing solutions are therefore critical to strengthen the support of development banks at all levels and to incentivize small and medium economies to redesign and re-engineer their modus operandi to survive external shocks and build resilience. We are therefore encouraged by the ongoing discussions within various fora on the use of a vulnerability index to govern decisions about concessional financing, as we believe that the use of GDP per capita does not take into account the full spectrum of challenges and vulnerabilities which individual countries are contending with and which should influence decisions about concessional financing. In the case of the Caribbean, for example, the classification of several of our countries as middle income using the per capita measure does not give an accurate picture of the unique vulnerabilities which these countries face and which remain a significant challenge for our region. And now on the issue of climate financing for resilience building, we've seen how the pandemic has highlighted the importance of the synergies between health, economy, climate, and biodiversity. And it has also highlighted the essence of partnerships and collaboration in addressing these issues. The adverse and potentially catastrophic impacts of climate change are increasingly being observed in many of our countries, including in Guyana. And we believe that the science is showing us very well that climate-related events will continue to increase in both intensity and frequency if the level of global mitigation ambition is not heightened enough to decrease global warming to 1.5 degrees by 2030 and net zero by 2050. With warming trajectories well above the 2-degree pathway, impacts to low-lying states like my country will be greater, and these states will need even more financing to adapt. Financing pledged in the Paris Agreement has not been met, and much of the financing that we're receiving is in the form of loans. when what we really need are grant-based financing mechanisms for adaptation and mitigation. Therefore, as part of this adaptation and mitigation thrust, we think that there is an urgent need for financing to develop resilient infrastructure. We advocate that innovative financing models to facilitate both public and private sector funding for nature-based solutions are crucial in reducing emissions and building resilience. In this context, Guyana supports plans to align financial flows with low greenhouse gas emission pathways and climate resilient development, as well as the development of the rule book under the Paris Agreement at the upcoming COP26. We believe that global coordination for green recovery post-pandemic is urgent. And in conclusion, I just wanted to highlight that nature-based solutions are increasingly emerging as a valuable, cost-effective pathway for mitigating climate change, restoring degraded land and biodiversity. And Guyana strongly submits that greater emphasis should be placed on the implementation of NBS. Thank you.
Thank you to the representative from Guyana. I shall give the floor to Ambassador Annabel Bueno.
Muy buenas tardes.
Ambassador, please proceed.
Sí, muy buenas tardes a todos y a todas. Agradecemos las interesantes exposiciones y el intercambio de experiencias en la región, tanto a nivel de la sociedad civil como del sector privado y de las delegaciones que me han precedido. Nos permitimos hacer uso de este espacio de diálogo para exponer brevemente algunas experiencias de mi país en relación al tema que nos ocupa. La República Dominicana ha asumido el compromiso de lograr una sociedad resiliente a los efectos del cambio climático, con políticas públicas alineadas al tratamiento respetuoso del planeta y con oportunidades inclusivas que garanticen la sostenibilidad. Los distintos sectores sociales han consensuado la necesidad de su inclusión en el diseño de las políticas públicas, sobre todo en el proceso de recuperación económica post-COVID-19. Aspiramos al logro de un acuerdo mundial basado en el consenso científico que evite el incremento de la temperatura media global de 2 grados Celsius con una resolución progresiva hasta 1.5 grados Celsius. Nos hemos comprometido además a alcanzar la neutralidad climática en las próximas 3 décadas, es decir, al 2050. Nuestro país, por su condición de pequeño estado insular en desarrollo y por encontrarse situado en una zona de intensa actividad ciclónica, se encuentra amenazado constantemente por eventos hidrometeorológicos como ondas tropicales, sequías, tormentas y huracanes, afectando asentamientos humanos así como nuestras actividades productivas. Eso nos sitúa en una posición de vulnerabilidad que nos pone en el compromiso de luchar para lograr una sociedad más consciente de los efectos del cambio climático. En materia de desarrollo sostenible, nuestro país ha articulado sus políticas públicas en base a 4 ejes estratégicos, los cuales incluyen una economía sostenible, integradora y competitiva y una sociedad de producción y consumo ambientalmente sostenible que se adapte al cambio climático. Las instituciones dominicanas están siendo alineadas al uso alternativo de los recursos y tienen dentro de sus objetivos en la materia lo siguiente: utilizar las fuentes nacionales de energía hidroeléctrica, bioenergías y otras fuentes renovables alternativas para consolidar las bases de la transición hacia un nuevo modelo energético menos dependiente de fuentes externas y bajo criterios de responsabilidad política y sustentabilidad social, económica y ambiental. Incrementar la participación y el uso eficiente de los recursos hídricos y otras fuentes renovables, así como el aumento del uso racional y eficiente de la energía como parte de un objetivo estratégico de disminuir los niveles de la huella de carbono. Fomentar la implementación de proyectos para promover un mayor incremento de la generación a partir de energía variable, eólica y fotovoltaica. Somos conscientes de que el esfuerzo regional para luchar contra los efectos del cambio climático resulta mandatorio en virtud de que nuestra región, por sus características naturales, su ubicación geográfica, su alto índice de pobreza y sus déficits sociales, conforman una de las regiones más vulnerables y amenazadas ante el cambio climático. Es por ello que el gobierno dominicano ha puesto un gran empeño en participar de manera activa en iniciativas regionales vinculadas al tema climático. Por último, destacamos que la República Dominicana ha sido seleccionada como campeones regionales para la región del Caribe para el Foro de Alto Nivel sobre Energía de Naciones Unidas. Entendemos que todo esto puede ser solo logrado con la debida articulación interinstitucional y el aprovechamiento del espacio regional y multilateral que permite el trabajo conjunto de los estados para hacer frente a esta problemática global en beneficio de las presentes y futuras generaciones. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Now, I would like, the organizers have graciously given us until 14 more minutes. So I will call on Ambassador Hugh Asset from Canada to please take the floor. I invite you to take the floor.
Well, thank you very much. And let me start by thanking you and the panelists for the discussion that we've had. We could, of course, I think, continue this for many hours. There's a lot of richness to what's been said, and I think quite a few points to explore. But I'll be brief. I just wanted to make a few comments before we wrap up today on a couple of themes. One, the role of the private sector, and that was mentioned by several of you. I think it's important to underline the fact that the summit could present some real opportunities to discuss the facilitation of climate-friendly investments as part of our recovery from the economic impacts of the pandemic, which several of you touched on. Companies that can integrate strong environmental, social, and governance policies throughout their activities perform well. And they perform well when it comes to attracting investment, when it comes to increasing the value of their brand, when it comes to retaining customers, and when it comes to being able to adapt and to mitigate risks. There's another area as well, which is responsible business conduct. And I think that's important for many, which includes respect for human rights. It includes taking action on climate change. It includes inclusive trade, and it includes upholding the rights of indigenous peoples. And Mr. Gonzalez, you spoke to that issue, I thought, quite eloquently this morning. And I think important to bring the perspective of indigenous peoples to this discussion as well. Our colleague from Guyana also mentioned financing for development, and I want to touch on that really briefly. The 2030 Agenda provides a roadmap for recovery, and there's a case, perhaps never stronger case, for development cooperation and for financing the Sustainable Development Goals than the one that we face now. That will require deploying innovative approaches to providing financing for development, and it includes strengthening multi-stakeholder partnerships between governments, the private sector, and civil society, much like the discussion we have had this morning. Very key to being able to mobilize resources to recover from the pandemic and to advance the Sustainable Development Goals. Trade and development, this reflects another point I mentioned a few seconds ago. I think we're concerned, deeply troubled by the pandemic's erosion of gains by developing countries, and particularly the impact, gains from the past decades, particularly the impact on women and on marginalized groups. There's been a significant rise in inequality, political instability, elevated debt levels, investment droughts as well. One of the approaches to that is open, free, inclusive, and a rules-based trade regime. That's a driver of regional value chains and economic growth, and we think that catalyzes the integration of developing and middle-income countries into regional and global markets. So we strongly believe that inclusive trade and development can strengthen hemispheric prosperity, resilience, and stability. As I say, I've got quite a few other things that we could go on about, but I know the time is limited. I just want to touch on one more, which is food security. The pandemic-related global economic recession has caused an unprecedented food security crisis. And I think this is something we need to be aware of as well. Also, an opportunity, though, post-COVID, to support a structural transformation in agri-food systems, including empowering smallholder farmers, especially women, to increase local production, resilience, and innovation. Thank you very much for your time. Really appreciated the panel this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your remarks. I don't see anyone else, well, requesting. Okay, yes, I'm sorry. Ms. Best is requesting the floor. Please proceed.
Great. Thank you and good morning. Valerie, happy to see you again. And to all the previous speakers for their very inspiring contribution. I just want to say a few words and to touch on a couple of things, some of which have been discussed before, so I won't go into details. Just to say, quickly to say to Ms. Richardson that you made a comment, which I noted and underlined, that you're soon to be leaders, and I want you to debunk that thought, that you are in fact a leader in your own right as a young person. Your voice needs to be heard and needs to be part of the process for transformation going forward in terms of climate change and building sustainable development for our hemisphere. Just to say quite quickly, as the world grapples to respond to this crisis, while we also focus on moving towards the 2030 agenda, there is a heightened recognition that food system spans across all 17 SDGs. I think the ambassador just mentioned that. Therefore, food systems are linked to climate change and includes interconnected and interdependent systems. The Secretary General of the United Nations has convened the 2021 Food System Summit, which is aimed at assessing the functioning of the global food system and for the international community to propose game-changing solutions for action that will feed into future summits such as COP26, and I would imagine the hemispheric meeting or the summit that comes up for the OAS in 2022. These actions must be defined at national, international, and hemispheric levels and must be targeted at the construction of more efficient food systems that are capable of achieving multiple goals that are needed to ensure a nutrition that is inclusive, quantitatively sufficient, safe for human health, nutritionally and environmentally adequate, and socially sustainable. The Inter-American Institute for Cooperation and Agriculture, which is ICA, is a member of the Summit's Champion Network, and which is one of the four main support structures of this global meeting that seeks to represent the voice of farmers in the Americas. Within the framework of the Food Systems Summit, ICA has organized and coordinated a series of discussions to include a range of stakeholder groups at the community, national, regional, hemispheric, and international levels. Cognizant of this, ICA has intensively or extensively engaged with farmers, researchers, academia, businesses, youth, women, civil society groups, among others. We believe that this inclusive approach is needed and critical if there's any chance of achieving transformation within the food system. We are confident that the call for game-changing solutions is not a call for negotiation, but a call to put into practice more tangibly and clearly and practically a system that is transformative and urgent. This is useful to synthesize as we recognize the divergent views and solutions are required to remove the barriers or challenges and to strengthen our networks for a more resilient and sustainable food system in the Americas. Moreover, all these interventions are taken within the Institute's 7 program areas and spans across 11 thematic areas, which have been discussed earlier on, but I'll just touch on what these areas are: digital agriculture, R&D and innovation, soils, sustainable livestock, cooperatives, women and youth, bioeconomy and international trade, One Health. And for the Caribbean, a special focus is looked at the 3 transversal topics, which is climate change, food security, and new financing models. As a specialized agency of the Inter-American System for Agriculture and Rural Development, I wish to share 3 messages that have so far been widely advocated and have emerged in the food systems dialogue in the Western Hemisphere. These are: 1, farmers first. Farmers and ranchers must be at the forefront and center of food system, and they need to be given a priority. They need to be given support and thanked for all the work they do not just to feed the world, but also to care for the environment. And this was clearly advocated by our brother from the indigenous group in terms of what the group brings to the fore in terms of caring for the environment. But we also note that this is a highly informal sector. They're in the rural area, they're small, and they represent the largest percentage of our poor people in the region, in the hemisphere. The second message is science, science, science must be the driving force for food policy discussions going forward. We must all agree to base our decisions on science and not let our ideological positions cloud our judgment about the innovation that are coming to agriculture. And that is in keeping with climate smart agriculture. And thirdly, which is the last message, that agriculture is an important part of the solution, not the problem for sustainable food system or even contributing to climate change per se. But agriculture has an impact on the climate and on greenhouse gas emission, but agriculture is part of the solution to addressing the challenges we are facing. And innovations in agriculture are leading the way to tackle many of these challenges. ICA will continue to support this process through engagements using all available platforms and avenues, sharing stakeholders' concern and building consensus as we aim for a regional position or hemispheric position at the Food System Summit that is upcoming in September. And as we envisage, these will feed into issues that will be discussed at the 9th Summit on perspectives related to climate change and sustainable development, towards ultimately transforming the agricultural sector of the hemisphere in the future. I thank you. I have much more to say, but I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Best. And in our remaining time, we have a few minutes left. I will try to summarize the excellent points raised from both the discussion and the panelists, as well as the delegation and the members of the joint working group. So I listened, and these are some of the main points that stood out or I was able to highlight. From the panelists raised quite a few issues, looking at, first of all, the human contribution to climate change, the significant impact on local economies, also the overexploitation of ecosystems and deforestation. Some of the perspectives on solutions that arose focused on people-centered solutions. Panelists highlighted that people are the most important asset that we have, and some proactive actions for protection of people are essential. Also, the need for an intergenerational approach, and it was highlighted that this is quite important, and that requires meaningful youth engagement. Also, the importance of protecting our lands and ensuring human well-being. Capacity building was highlighted as a key aspect to achieving those solutions. There was mention on the protection of natural resources and decarbonization of the economy. That was highlighted as an area, and panelists mentioned the need to protect the planet, reduction of oil exploitation and the reliance on fossil fuel, the need to protect biodiversity. Also, decarbonization of the economy through, for example, renewable energy, energy efficiency, promotion of regional energy integration, and the need to accelerate the transition to a net zero economy. Greater emphasis or attention for the protection of natural resources and the most vulnerable. Partnership was highlighted by, I think, almost every speaker. The need for collaboration between the private sector, civil society, and the governments. And again, the whole of government approach, whole of society approaches to dealing with the climate challenges. Also, I mentioned that enabling governments to create enabling environments for these solutions or these approaches to occur, and also to catalyze and incentivize the private sector investments. Collaboration among the key stakeholders is important for joint engagement for proper management of the natural resources. There's also mention of green bonds as an opportunity to stimulate investment in climate resilience. And of course, always have a focus on sustainable practices. Then I heard mention of walking the talk and actually taking action as opposed to what we tend to do quite well. The need to break down the silos, the need to embrace innovation and new technologies, the need to update legislation and regulatory frameworks so that they're aligned with what we're trying to achieve. Also, consultation with all stakeholders, including especially indigenous people. The delegation representatives mentioned the vulnerability of the LAC region, and again, the importance of securing adequate investments to deal with those challenges. It was mentioned that COVID-19 was exacerbating some of the challenges in the LAC. The need to facilitate sustainable debt management, need for concessional financing, given the minimum fiscal room that these LAC and Caribbean governments currently have. And I heard the use of a vulnerability index instead of GDP in determining country eligibility to concessional financing. Again, it was emphasized, again, it was raised by the panelists, and we heard the need for greater emphasis on nature-based solutions, and to round it off, the crucial need to address food security. I hope I have captured the main points that were raised by the panelists as well as the delegation and representatives from for the Joint Summit Working Group. So with that, I would really like to thank all the panelists and as well as the delegation representatives who participated, who spoke during this session. I would also like to thank the chair of the Summits process and the Summits of America Secretariat for their confidence in the Secretariat and for providing the space for us to have this dialogue. Again, I will really repeat my thank you to the participants in the dialogue, the delegations, and the institutions of the Joint Working Group. Without you, this would not have been a successful session. And as well as, sorry, my computer is doing strange things. My apologies to all. I would also like to mention again the representatives of the civil society, social actors, private sector who participated actively. We hope that all the ideas, the proposals, the recommendations that were mentioned during this dialogue could contribute to the additional or ongoing discussions of the states as they prepare for the 9th Summit of the Americas. And finally, I would like to thank the audience who were able to follow us through this dialogue. So thank you, everyone, and please stay safe.
And thank you, Ms. Isaac, very much for being an exceptional moderator and for a great summing up. Thank you very much to all the panelists, and I look forward to working with you as the summit progresses. Bye-bye.
Thank you all very much. Thank you, Ms. Isaac. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.